Can we really eliminate the ums and uhs out of a speaking presentation? Well, today on iTalkDEO, I'm going to give you 7 solutions on how to remove the uhs and ums. So stay tuned for iTalkDEO with Dale LaBrocta, removing the uhs and ums from your speaking presentation. Hi, it's Dale from iTalkDEO. Here to talk today about removing the uhs and the ums. We're going to start off with talking about ums and uhs. Then later on in the video, I'm going to give you 7 tips on how to remove the dreaded uhs and ums. And also, I'm going to give you 3 things that are actually positive about ums and uhs. Now, I know if you're a Toastmaster, you're sitting there going, no, there's nothing good about ums and uhs. But actually, there are 3 tips that I'll show you at the end. So here we go. Ums and uhs. It's a problem. I can't even demonstrate ums and uhs because the whole video would be ums and uhs. So I'm going to relate this to something I know, balloon entertaining. When I started balloon entertaining, I would actually start making a figure. And you make the figure, and as you're making it, in the beginning, you find that there are times that the balloon pops. And people start to look at you. And you realize that you need to keep working, so you take that balloon and you add into it and you keep working. And the next thing you know, out of nowhere, for no reason at all, the balloon pops. Again, people start to look at you and you're drawing more attention to you every time a balloon pops. This process can keep going on until all of a sudden the person that you're making the balloon for looks you direct in the eye and says, if you can't make it, if it's too hard, do something easier. I'm a professional. Make something easier? No way. I've made this balloon a couple 100 times before. It is a bad balloon. I'm just running into problems. And it pops again. Well, that's the same thing with ums and uhs. As a professional speaker, we work very hard to eliminate the ums and uhs from our presentation. In doing this, we become and look professional. But as a beginner, ums and uhs, it's very common to have ums and uhs. Just like a beginner who's doing balloons can break a balloon and nobody thinks anything of it because they are a beginner. So the beginners out there, if you find that you're doing a lot of ums and uhs, don't freak out. It's very natural. Just like the guy learning to do balloons breaks a lot of balloons. But when you become a professional speaker, you'll find that the ums and uhs and filler words slowly start to disappear. And why is that? Because you've crafted your skills, you put in the techniques that allow you to actually build a presentation that will make you look like a superhero on stage. So let's talk about the 7 tips you can do to remove the uhs and ums. And later in this video, I'm still going to give you 3 more tips on the positive things for the ums and uhs. So let's start off. The first thing, and this is all over the internet because I've researched it. Everybody tells you, and this is even true in Toastmasters, to replace the and the with a pause. Now, it sounds really easy to replace the uhs and the ums with a pause because in theory, that's where you should be pausing. If you're giving a sequence, we don't go, this, and oh wait, and yeah, we get one of these, and no, we would basically say 1, say the information, 2, and there'd be pauses in between, just like bullet points. But adding pauses is a very difficult technique to learn. Not everybody could do it. So don't feel bad if you are struggling trying to put a pause in where you really went, Secondly, chunking. That's what I do in a lot of my presentation. This is the ability to take your speech and break it into small sections. making it easier for you to remember what each topic is. I find that when I chunk information, it becomes easy. Which leads me to the third, is the transition. Now that I've chunked one piece of information, I've chunked another piece, and I chunked another, I have to fill in these spots on either side. So this is where third comes in, transitioning, is knowing how to move from one segment to another. Now the technique that I use that has worked for me, it may work for you, is every time I transition from one area to another in practice, I change the transition slightly. What this does for me, it makes me think about how to move from one subject to another. So I'm filling in those blank spots in my brain to make it easier from going from point to point. Those are the spots where people will tell you, put a pause in. But in reality, the pause doesn't work because we forget about that and we go, So to do that is create transitions. And when you know a transition to a transition, it makes things easier. Now, the fourth was actually brought up in a Toastmasters meeting. The club secretary came up and said, make visual eye contact. When you stare at your audience and you make that one-on-one contact, what happens is you transform from a speaker to somebody just talking. And think about your daily conversations. When you have a daily conversation, the ums and the uhs and the pauses are naturally there. You notice how I'm having a natural conversation with you and things just got slower. And that is actually the fifth technique, is to slow down. Many times when we talk quickly. Our mind is racing because we're trying to figure out what to say next. If we actually slow down, take our time, we'll find that our mind processes just as fast as our mouth does. We have that moment to actually stop and think about what we're talking about. So if we're addressing somebody in the audience, we could actually take that moment. The pause happens naturally, and the conversation starts. We've made that eye conversation, which leads into the next transition of 6, relax. It is the hardest thing for anybody who's giving a speech for the first time, and for me just to say, go out and relax, it doesn't happen. But there are 2 things you could think about. First of all, your audience is really here to listen to you. So they're going to accept what you're saying. And second, think about all the time that you've prepped. You have to build the confidence in you. And when you have the confidence, it comes across in your presentation. Now, the 7th tip, and this I found interesting when I found it online, was using your voice, projecting your voice. Change your octave, move it up, move it down. When you add voice inflections, it's part of that chunking process, it's part of that transition process. And when you project your voice, it's kind of hard to throw in an or an ah because it's a different voice. Now, as I promised, I was going to give you 3 positive things about ums and ahs. And I know there are people going, no, Dale, this cannot be possible. But in reality, it is. The 3 things, first of all, when you do an or an ah, you actually slow down. And it's a natural reaction that when a speaker does an you're actually thinking. And it gives you time to transition. So the ums and ahs are good. But here, if you recall when I was making that Spider-Man, 1 pop is okay, 2 pops, but when you have after or ahs, and you could start counting them down, I had a college professor who did after every time he interviewed somebody. He'd ask them a question, And in one video, I counted 17 in the first minute. I lost full track of what he was talking about because I heard and he actually gave a head nod too. If you're doing a lot of the uhs and ums, that will become distracting. So remove those. Second thing, there was a study that was done, and this was an interesting study, and I'll have a link to it on my blog about this, removing the uhs and ums. The study actually said they took a group of students, I'm assuming they were students, it was an audience, and they gave them a presentation to listen to. The first presentation had all the ums and uhs in there. That's somebody who was a beginner speaker, and there were a lot of them. The second, they started eliminating the uhs and ums, so there were less ums in the whole presentation. And the third thing they did was they removed the ums and uhs altogether and just replaced it with pauses. Now the study pulled something out that was very interesting. For all the people who heard the uhs and ums, they rated that as an average speech. Their takeaway information was quite knowledgeable. Now, the second group rated that speech actually higher than the first. There were less ums and uhs, which sounded more professional, but also people walked away knowing more information again, because when you did an or an or a filler word, it actually showed to the audience that you were actually thinking about your answer, which is a funny study because my uncle, who was an executive, used to drive me crazy as a kid. I would sit there and I'd go, Uncle John, how do airplanes fly? And he'd look at me and go, good question, let me think about it. And as a kid, I look at him and go, Uncle John, did you hear me? How do airplanes fly? And he'd go, good question. Hang on, I'm thinking about it. And what I learned years later is the trick he was taught in executive school was when somebody asks you a question, pause. Count to 3. 1, 2, 3, answer. If they answer or re-ask the question again, count to 5 to 7 in your head. The reason why you were doing that was you were building up anticipation. And that is something that happens when you add in pauses. So when you pause, your rate slows down, you start thinking, and people start to anticipate the uhs and the ums. Now, getting back to the survey, the first one they rated okay, the second one they rated it higher, and the third one they rated it less. Because there was no anticipation, there was just silence. So if you're replacing your uhs and ums, be careful if you're going to put pauses in, because if you put too many pauses in, you're going to lose your audience. And the third thing is when you do the ums and uhs, it sounds natural. People have a tendency to follow somebody who said and But again, don't have every other word. That will deter the audience from listening. So those were the 7 tips on how to eliminate the uhs and ums, and 3 reasons why ums and uhs are actually useful. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're new here, please look around, watch the other videos, and consider subscribing. My name is Dale LaBrocta. This is iTalkDEO, helping you to communicate better. Go watch a video.